Hey APUSH gang, it is Friday, October 15th, and it's been a weird week. I think there were only 6 kids here yesterday. So I'm trying to figure out how to best way to move forward. So since some of you are just not feeling good, some of you are absent for other reasons, some of you are in quarantine, some of you are sick, I don't know what everybody's capable of. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload the lesson, and actually I'm going to include Tuesday and Thursday's lessons. So for those of you that were here Tuesday but not Thursday, you're going to hear a little bit of overlap, but that's okay. I'm going to make this quick and concise and hopefully catch everybody up. But obviously I've uploaded this to Google Classroom, and so on Tuesday, for those of you that were not here, we spent a pretty significant amount of time talking about Washington, D.C. and the trip, and kind of your impressions of everything and what your favorite things were and all that stuff, which was kind of enlightening. And then we did some review. I'm going to go to my PowerPoint here. We talked about, we actually did a short answer question reviewing our previous periods 1 and 2, and we walked through that, we talked through that. And then let me think here. We didn't get too far, but we talked about the short answer question that we did, and then I introduced the next unit, period 3. I passed out a lot of stuff, and so I put packets together for everybody that was gone. So that you can have that. We practiced a map of the 13 colonies. What else did we do? I handed out period 3 questions. Period 3 covers the very end of chapter 4 and then chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8, I think. So it's a pretty significant period, and I think you're going to enjoy it because we're getting ready to go. We are going to talk about the French and Indian War, but then we just kind of jump into the American Revolution and all of the things leading up to that, like the Boston Tea Party, the Boston Massacre, and then this period will also cover the presidents, I think Washington and Adams. I believe those two, maybe even more. So this is kind of a really cool period that we're about to enter, especially in light of the fact that you've just been to Mount Vernon, you've visited George Washington's home, kind of understand why he was bummed that he had to leave there and serve his country in other capacities. So, so before I go on, that's kind of where we're headed. We're headed into period 3. I don't feel like I can put the brakes on because of all of this chaos, because we lost an entire week, not lost, but missed a week of classes for the trip, and now we're missing another week of classes. Essentially, a lot of you are, because of sickness and other reasons, and so we got to keep going forward. So at this point, for those of you that have not been here for a variety of reasons, again, some of you are not feeling well, some of you feel fine, you should, as far as your reading assignments go, you should finish chapter 4, read the last few pages, which include pages 160 to 169, and that will wrap up, or actually that's going to be our intro to period 3. Typically, all of chapter 4 in the French and Indian War is covered in period 2, but I like to cover it as the beginning of period 3 because it helps to explain, flesh out the reasons for all of the conflict with the British. It's largely as a result of the French and Indian War. So the last few pages of chapter 4 are going to start our period 3. It is primarily the French and Indian War. Mr. Heimler has a great 6 or 7 minute video on the French and Indian War. I want you all to watch it. And then there are 4 writing prompts associated with pages 160 to 169. If you had been in class, I would have asked you to pick one and write your writing response to one of those questions, but since you weren't here and weren't available for our discussion about each one of those questions, I want you to do all 4 of them. I'm not looking for an essay for each one. I just want a good solid paragraph or so that answers the question with the historical reasoning skill associated with it, including evidence, okay? I am also going to ask those of you that are at home that weren't here on Tuesday, some of you were here on Tuesday, but for those of you that were not here on Tuesday, I want you to complete the short answer question. On the short answer question, which was a review of periods 1 and 2, there is a map that portrays the triangular trade. And there is a B, and a C that you are to answer. Some of you that are at home did not have AP last year and you have no idea, well, you're a little confused about what a short answer question is. So since you're not in class, I will give you some specific instructions in Google Classroom, but on video as well. For A, B, and C, which there's 3 parts of each short answer question. It'll say SAQ, which stands for short answer question. There's parts A, parts B, parts C. I am asking you to answer each part, A, B, and C, with 3 sentences. And we're going to use the, excuse me, the ACE method, ACE, which stands for answer the question that you've been asked, cite evidence to support your conclusion, and then explain your answer, so elaborate a little bit more. If you end up with 4 sentences, that's okay, but I would prefer that you try to do it in 3 sentences. And so I will upload that as well. Let's see here. Okay, so that's essentially what we did on Tuesday. So if you were here in class on Tuesday, you can kind of fast forward through this. And then yesterday in class, let me grab one of these. We completed a travel brochure journal, actually travel journal from Washington, D.C. Looks, I don't want you to have to read all of this, but that's what it looks like. This is kind of the conclusion of your project grade for the Washington, D.C. trip. And I'm going to upload the grades for these to RenWeb this afternoon, because today is the end of quarter 1. Now, obviously, you're not going to be able to complete this, but the trip itself is 90% of the grade. And so I'm going to assume that when you return to school, you will complete this to my satisfaction and you will get a 50 out of 50. So it's going to be sort of a 50 out of 50 pending. I can change the grade if I need to. Your grade for this project will be concluded when you turn this back into me. After I've graded them, upon your return, I will return these to you, and it'll be a memento for you of the trip. The pictures actually turned out really good. I looked for some high resolution pictures, so they're very, very sharp. The pictures are sharp, and so I think you'll actually enjoy keeping this. And if you don't want to keep it, give it to your parents, because parents love to keep this sort of thing, because I'm a parent and I know. So we did that at the end of class on Thursday. So we spent the bulk of class on Thursday, other than that, talking about the French and Indian War. So you should have read pages 160 to 169. The kids came in Thursday. They picked one of the 4 questions, which you're going to answer all 4, which unpack the reading assignment and the French and Indian War and George Washington's involvement in that. So I would like for you to do that. I'm going to send you a PowerPoint that includes Tuesday and Thursday's lessons. Let me zip over here. I'm trying to remember. Let me go to slideshow. Okay, so just very briefly, some of the things we talked about in class is the fact that in 1754, when the French and Indian War starts, there has been, decades of tension and conflict between the European empires, the French and the Spanish and the British. Great Britain was kind of at the bottom of that list, but by the time the French and Indian War ends, everything has shifted, and the British, or Great Britain, I would say, arrives at the top of the list of empirical powers, European powers. The French lose a lot, at least in the Western Hemisphere. The Spanish reorganize. And so, unfortunately, the French and Indian War, the conflict, the war itself, created quite a conundrum for the native populations of North America, who had been playing the French and the British and the Spanish off of one another, and vying for power, and they were able to maintain an semblance of peace between the white man and themselves But once the French and Indian War was over and the French were extradited, so to speak, from North America, the Indians found themselves in a pickle because there was no leverage anymore, at least in the Ohio River Valley. And so we spent some time talking about that. We talked about Fort Necessity. I told the kids that I had read an account about George Washington's involvement in the beginning of the French and Indian War. Historians claim that his encounter with the French, who were building forts in British claimed territory in the Ohio River Valley, is what began the war. And I read another account of these events that is not in your textbook, and that George Washington, he was sent into that area to scout it out. That's what he primarily did as a young man. He was a scout, land scout, purchased land for his family and for himself, and for various land holding companies. And he reported back to his British superiors, who then sent him with a couple of regiments to displace the French forts that had been built in that area that the British claimed. And so one of the accounts that I read is that Washington and a couple of his, I'll call them advisors, or one of them was a scout that was with him, encountered a French spy or a scout/spy in the area, and they roughed him up a little bit to get him to spill the beans about the French plans and where were they and whatnot. And Washington wasn't involved in this, other than he was part of the exploration party. But the 2 or 3 guys that he was working with, when they were interrogating the French scout/spy, either they beat him to death or brutally beat him. And when the French forces found out about this, that is part of what contributed to their coming and finding Washington and his regiments and attacking them, sort of in payment for what had happened to this young French soldier. And so that account is not in your textbook, so I don't know, I can't even remember where I read that, but I thought that was sort of interesting. And as you know, George Washington finds himself surrounded in his fort, and undergoes a pretty significant pummeling. I think he loses a third of his men to fatalities or wounds, and he has to surrender. I'm going to upload it. One of the things that I have in your packet here for you is a primary source or a primary document that is Washington's reflections about how this all unfolded, his surrender unfolded, and there weren't just French soldiers attacking Fort Necessity. There were also Native Americans that were fighting with the French. And according to Washington's memoirs, as he and his officers were leaving, the Indians were taking their personal belongings off of them and harassing them as they were surrendering. Now, Washington, although he was the surrendering officer, he was released, which would have been customary in some cases with proper gentleman warfare. But the Indians didn't fight properly. And so we'll find this out later. It was customary for the native populations, when they engaged in war, if they won a battle, they stayed and they essentially killed everybody that had surrendered, that was left, tortured them, mutilated their bodies, sort of as a way to instill fear, but it was also part of their custom. You left nothing alive, and you mutilated everything, including the women, the children. If there were certain children that were left behind, sometimes the Indians would take them and bring them into their tribe and raise them as their own. And so Washington experienced a little bit of that harassment, but the French kept the Indians at bay. They didn't allow them to harm Washington and his surrendering soldiers. So anyway, we talked also about the fact, if you've seen the Hamilton musical, one of the songs that is sung by George Washington is "Who Will Tell the Story of Us?" We've lived this life, we've started this country, we fought this war. Who's going to tell our story? So the primary document that you'll be reading, which is a reflection or a memoir of Washington's experiences at Fort Necessity, was actually told to one of his aides who was writing memoirs or writing a history of what had happened, of George Washington, really. And so when George Washington is telling this story, he is telling this young man 20 or 30 years after Fort Necessity's, the battle at Fort Necessity. And so it's just kind of interesting in light of that musical. But there was something else related to the musical that I thought was interesting. I don't remember right now. But anyway, we are entering a stage where I will be able to go into or dive into some of the Hamilton songs that I can to give you a visual of what we're talking about. But anyway, and so the French and Indian War introduces George Washington onto the scene, and it also reorganizes the powers, the European powers. And it also, England incurs, or Great Britain incurs, huge, massive amount of debt because any European conflict that happens in North America is probably happening around the globe. The French and Indian War was the third or fourth such conflict that the British had been engaged in, and so they were in pretty serious financial duress. And they're going to pay for that by taxing their North American colonies and by enforcing their navigation laws that they've ignored for a very long time. They're going to have to send more redcoats to North America to protect the colonists against the Indian populations that are now in disarray once the French have left the scene. And so things are going to escalate. That association with the British that has connected those 13 colonies together is about to become very frayed as the colonists begin to feel like their rights as Englishmen are being violated. And the English are going to start taxing them. We're getting very close to the Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party, the Stamp Act, those sorts of things. And so things are going to get kind of interesting. It's kind of fun. So we did not get to Pontiac's rebellion other than briefly mentioning it. This was one of the Indian conflicts that arose as a result of this reorganization of European affairs. And that took place in Detroit. We talked about the Paxton attacks. We talked a little bit about how Pennsylvania was shook up in the aftermath of the French and Indian War, and just the whole dichotomy, I guess, that Pennsylvania was founded on the idea of good relations with the Indians, and as the Quakers left the scene, those that filled in the gap extradited all of the native population from Pennsylvania. So you should have read about that in your reading assignment. And then we'll talk about the proclamation line of 1763 probably in class next week. So all that said, short, sweet little video lecture here. So first assignment, make sure you've read pages 160 to 169 and answered all 4 writing prompts. And I will upload a Google Doc for that. And then our homework assignment for Tuesday of next week is pages 175 to 185, which is in chapter 5. It's essentially the opening pages of chapter 5, the opening stages of the tension that culminates into the American Revolution. So 160 to 169, jump ahead to 175 to 185. Let me think what else. And so I will probably have writing prompts for Tuesday. Oh, I know what I was going to say. For those of you that will be returning on Monday, next week is another weird schedule because we have parent-teacher conferences. So on Thursday, Monday is going to be a Wednesday, Friday schedule. It'll be your Wednesday block classes. There's no chapel on Monday because of the short week. So Monday, Wednesday will be your Monday, Wednesday classes. Monday will be your Wednesday, Friday block classes, and then Tuesday and Thursday will be your regular Tuesday, Thursday classes. So I won't have you on Monday like I normally do for a short period of time on chapel day. I won't have you until Tuesday. And so you can wait until Monday night to read your assignment if you want to. For Tuesday, that's totally up to you. But it sounds like a lot of you will be back on Monday. So anyway, I'm thinking about you all. I'm so sorry that you're stuck at home. I'm very thankful that you had the experience in Washington, D.C. that you did. And I'm sorry that we had this little bump on the road on the back end of that. But years from now, you will remember Washington, D.C. You will not probably even remember being at home this week. So anyway, have a safe, good weekend. Enjoy your family. If you're sick, stay away from your family. I'll be thinking about you and praying for you all throughout the course of the week. And I look forward to having everybody back in class again. And I think that's it. Signing out for now. Bye.